During the Millionaire's wedding, a little beggar interrupted the ceremony and took the microphone. When her first words echoed through the church, the millionaire fell to his knees at the altar in tears. The afternoon sun was punishing Los Angeles as Charles Dawson drove his luxury car through the congested downtown streets. The 40-year-old businessman adjusted the air conditioning, his watchful eyes alternating between the chaotic traffic and the golden watch on his wrist. An important meeting awaited him, but something that afternoon would make his plans change completely. "This traffic is going to drive me insane," he muttered to himself, drumming his fingers on the leather steering wheel. His impeccable Italian suit and refined perfume contrasted with the popular environment of the area, where street vendors and hurried workers mingled on the crowded sidewalks. Perhaps I should have chosen another route. The suffocating heat of the Mexican afternoon made the asphalt seem to ripple in the distance, while a cacophony of honking horns competed with the shouts of street vendors. Charles adjusted his silk tie, feeling beads of sweat running down his forehead despite the air conditioning of his luxury car. His eyes scanned the crowd through the tinted windows, observing the chaotic dance of everyday life unfolding on the streets, children running between fruit stalls, the elderly chatting at shop doors, and porters balancing heavy boxes on their shoulders. How does this city manage to function like this? He thought, checking the golden watch on his wrist once more. The traffic light turned red again, forcing him to stop. Charles took the opportunity to observe the movement around him, a practice he had developed over the years, to better understand the city where he had built his empire. That's when his eyes caught an unusual movement on the opposite sidewalk. "Please get out of the way!" shouted a desperate, childlike voice. A girl of about 12 years old was running among the pedestrians, her black, unkempt hair flying in the wind. Her worn and dirty clothes revealed her status as a street dweller, but there was a determination in her movements that caught Charles's attention. The reason for her running soon became apparent. A scruffy, skinny and frightened stray dog had become disoriented in the middle of traffic. A bus was approaching at high speed, its distracted driver engaged in an argument with passengers. The inevitable was about to happen. "My God, no!" Charles exclaimed, his heart racing as he saw the girl lunge towards the animal. Without thinking about the consequences, she plunged between the cars, her thin arms wrapping around the trembling body of the dog. The bus passed by, grazing her, its booming horn echoing through the street as the girl rolled with the animal onto the sidewalk. Charles braked sharply, ignoring the irritated protests of the other drivers. Within seconds, he was out of the car, his Italian shoes hitting the asphalt as he ran towards the girl. She was sitting on the sidewalk, still embracing the trembling dog that was licking her face in gratitude. "Are you all right?" he asked, crouching down beside her. His experienced eyes quickly assessed the damage. Some scrapes on her arms and knees, a small cut on her cheek, but nothing serious. What impressed him the most, however, was the look in the girl's eyes, a mixture of courage and dignity that transcended her ragged appearance. "My name is Emma," she replied, her voice soft but firm, still caressing the dog. "And I'm fine, I'm just worried about him. Look how hurt he is." Her fingers gently examined a small wound on the animal's paw, which seemed to have calmed down completely in her arms. Charles observed the scene with fascination. In all his years of business, between million-dollar contracts and endless meetings, he couldn't remember the last time he had witnessed such a pure and selfless act of kindness. "Why did you do that, Emma? You could have gotten much more hurt." Her answer caught him off guard. "Because no one else was going to help," she said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Everyone deserves a chance, don't they? Even a stray dog." The crowd of pedestrians began to disperse, losing interest in the unusual scene. Charles remained crouched beside Emma, watching as she continued to care for the dog with a gentleness that contrasted with her own haggard appearance. His thoughts were racing, weighing a decision that could change the lives of everyone involved. "Emma," he began, his voice taking on a softer tone, "I can't let you go back to the streets in this condition. I have a big house not too far from here. We can take care of those injuries and give your new friend a bath and some food." His eyes met hers, trying to convey the sincerity of his words. The girl's body instantly tensed, her arms tightening protectively around the dog. Years on the streets had taught her to distrust the kindness of others, especially from well-dressed strangers. "Why do you want to help me?" she asked, her voice carrying a sad wisdom beyond her years. The traffic remained intense around them, horns and engines forming an urban symphony that now seemed distant. Charles carefully considered his answer, aware that he needed to gain her trust. "Because you just taught me something I had forgotten," he replied honestly, "that there are still people capable of risking everything to help someone, or some animal." A group of executives passed by them, casting disapproving looks at the scene. A well-dressed businessman talking to a dirty street girl and a scruffy stray dog. Emma instinctively shrank back, as if she wanted to become invisible. "Rich people never help without wanting something in return," she muttered, more to herself than to him. "Perhaps you're right most of the time," Charles agreed, surprising her. "But sometimes, Emma, people do good things simply because it's the right thing to do. And right now, the right thing is not to let you and your friend go back to the streets injured and hungry." The dog, which until then had been silently observing the conversation, approached Charles and began sniffing his hand. After a moment of consideration, it gently licked his fingers, eliciting a small, surprised smile from Emma. "He never does that," she said, her tone revealing a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "He usually doesn't trust anyone." The businessman smiled, seizing that small opening. "They say animals have a sixth sense for judging people," he commented, extending his hand to gently pet the dog's head. "Maybe he knows he can trust me, and maybe you can too." Emma watched the interaction between the two, her face revealing the internal conflict she was waging. The hunger gnawing at her stomach and the fatigue of sleepless nights on the streets battled against years of bitter experiences and distrust. "What if," she began hesitantly, "what if I accept to go? What will happen then?" Charles rose slowly, brushing the dust off his expensive suit with a casual gesture. "First, we'll take care of you two," he replied, his voice conveying a reassuring certainty. "After that, together, we can think about how to change your future. What do you say?" The distant sound of a siren cut the air, making Emma start. Years on the streets had developed in her a sharp survival instinct, and every loud noise represented a potential threat. The dog, sensing her tension, pressed its snout against her hand in a protective gesture, as if to remind her of its comforting presence. "If I go with you," she began, her voice trembling but determined, "promise you won't separate us. He's the only family I have now." Her dark eyes met Charles's, conveying a mixture of hope and fear that touched him deeply. The businessman noticed how she held the dog, not like someone clinging to a lifeline, but like someone protecting a precious treasure. The traffic continued intense around them, an involuntary audience for that moment of decision. A street vendor passed by pushing his fruit cart, the sweet scent of ripe mangoes perfuming the air. Emma felt her stomach growl, painfully reminding her of how long it had been since her last decent meal. "Listen," said Charles, crouching again to be at eye level with her. "I'll make a solemn promise. You two will stay together, no matter what happens." He placed his hand on his chest in a theatrical gesture that drew a small smile from her. "In fact, I think my house could use a four-legged guardian." The dog, as if understanding it was being mentioned, wagged its tail and let out a soft bark, breaking some of the tension of the moment. Emma couldn't help but laugh, the crystalline sound of her joy contrasting with the noise of the city around them. "I think he liked the idea," she commented, her defenses gradually starting to lower. Charles stood up and extended his hand to help her. "So it's decided? Shall we give this new life a chance?" His voice carried a kindness that Emma was not used to hearing from adults, especially those who wore expensive suits and drove luxury cars. The girl looked one last time at the busy street, at the familiar sidewalks where she had spent so many nights. There was her chance for change, offered by a stranger who had stopped to help when so many others had simply walked on by. The dog in her arms licked her face, as if giving its approval to the plan. "That's fine," she finally replied, accepting Charles' outstretched hand. "But if he pees in your car, it's not my fault." The innocent remark made the businessman laugh genuinely, a sound that surprised even himself. How long had it been since he had laughed like that? The walk to the car was short, but for Emma it seemed an eternity. Each step took her further away from her old life and closer to something completely unknown. The dog followed obediently at her side, as if understanding the importance of that moment. Charles opened the rear door of his imported car, and Emma hesitated for a moment before getting in, still holding her furry companion tightly. The luxurious interior was a whole new world for her. Soft leather, refreshing air conditioning, a silence that isolated the sounds of the city. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice small but curious as Charles settled into the driver's seat. "To a place where you two can start a new life," he replied, starting the car and meeting her gaze in the rearview mirror. "And Emma, thank you for reminding me that there is still goodness in the world." The girl smiled shyly, sinking into the soft seat as the car started moving, taking her towards a future that, for the first time in a long time, seemed promising. The traffic started to flow more freely as they left the city center. Emma watched, fascinated, as the streets gradually changed, the commercial buildings giving way to larger houses, the sidewalks becoming cleaner and more tree-lined. The dog on her lap seemed equally intrigued, its snout pressed against the window, leaving marks that at other times would have annoyed Charles. Today, however, he could only smile at the scene in the rearview mirror. "I've never ridden in a car like this before," Emma confessed, her fingers absently caressing the soft leather of the seat. "It's like being in a spaceship." The innocent comparison made Charles laugh again, a sound that seemed to be becoming more frequent in her presence. "You know, when I was little, I had never been in a car like this either," he shared, turning onto a wide, tree-lined street. "The first time I rode in a luxury car was when I won my first big construction contract. I was 30 years old." Emma's eyes widened at the revelation. "Really? You weren't born rich?" The surprise in her voice was genuine, as if the idea of someone changing their life was a completely new concept to her. "No," Charles replied, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "I was born in a small village, far from here. My parents worked in the fields. I came to the city alone at 18 with nothing but an old backpack and many dreams." He paused, recalling those difficult times. "That's why I know that sometimes all someone needs is an opportunity." The silence that followed was comfortable, each lost in their own thoughts. The dog had fallen asleep on Emma's lap, its soft snoring mingling with the gentle hum of the engine. The girl noticed that her hands, usually tense and ready to react to any threat, were relaxed for the first time in a long time. "I think I'll call him Lucky," she said suddenly, looking at the sleeping dog, "because it was a miracle he wasn't run over. And another miracle that you stopped to help us." Charles felt something tighten in his chest at those words. "Lucky," he repeated, testing the name. "It's perfect. And maybe," he added, slowing down as they approached a large wrought-iron gate, "that's exactly what's happening here. A little lucky for all of us." The car began to ascend a private road, lined with ancient, well-tended trees. Emma leaned forward in her seat, her eyes catching the first glimpse of what would be her new home. For the first time since accepting Charles's offer, she felt not only hope, but also the certainty that she had made the right decision. Lucky stretched on her lap, as if waking from a long dream, ready to begin his new life by her side. The Dawson mansion stood imposing under the afternoon sun. At the top of the main staircase, Harriet Parker awaited with her impeccable posture, her uniform perfectly pressed and a sweet smile on her lips. Her graying hair was pulled back in an elegant bun, and her hands folded in front of her body conveyed an image of serenity and kindness. "Harriet," Charles called, helping Emma out of the car with Lucky still in her arms. "I need your help. This little one is Emma, and this is Lucky. I found them in the city center." The governess descended a few steps, her face showing concern as she saw the scratches on the girl's face. "Good heavens," Harriet exclaimed, her melodious voice filled with worry. "How did this happen, poor dear?" Her eyes studied Emma carefully as she drew closer to examine the injuries more closely. Charles consulted his gold watch, frowning slightly. "Harriet, I need you to take good care of them. Emma needs a good lunch, a hot bath, and clean clothes." He looked affectionately at the dog, "and call Dr. Martinez, that private veterinarian. Lucky needs to be examined and have his fur treated." "Naturally, sir," Harriet replied, her calm, steady smile in place. "Leave everything to me. When you return, you'll find a true transformation." She extended her hand to Emma, who hesitated for a moment before accepting it. "I need to meet with my lawyer," Charles explained, crouching down to speak with Emma. "I'll see how we can help you and Lucky have a better future. Mrs. Harriet will take good care of you while I'm gone." Emma hugged Lucky tighter, her voice small but firm. "You promise you'll come back?" "Of course I'll come back," Charles smiled, gently touching the girl's shoulder. I have to see how the transformation turned out, don't I? And then, he added with a wink, we can talk about that empty room at the end of the hallway. Don't worry, sir, said Harriet, her voice soft and reassuring. I'll take care of everything personally. As Charles's car drove away, Harriet looked at Emma by her side. Shall we go inside, dear? She invited, guiding her into the mansion. We have a lot of work ahead of us. The mansion's kitchen was a spacious and immaculate environment, where every utensil gleamed under the light, streaming in through the tall windows. Harriet served Emma a warm soup, which she ate, trying to maintain her polite manners despite her evident hunger. Lucky rested at the girl's feet, occasionally receiving small pieces of meat that she discreetly dropped. Eat slowly, dear, Harriet instructed, her tone gentle and maternal. After lunch, we'll take care of your appearance. Her eyes closely watched every move the girl made as she methodically organized the kitchen. The wall phone rang and Harriet rose quickly. Finish your meal, I'll answer in the library, she said, hurrying out. Stay here with Lucky. After finishing the soup, Emma's natural curiosity awakened. With Lucky in tow, she silently followed the hallway toward the library, her street survival skills helping her move without a sound. The door was ajar, allowing Harriet's voice to escape. Yes, the governess said on the phone, her voice sounding different from the tone she had used so far. Don't worry, everything is under control. We're very close to finalizing our plan. Emma felt her heart race as she heard those words. Her hands absent-mindedly stroked Lucky's ears, who remained strangely quiet by her side. Harriet's voice continued, lower now, almost a whisper. Emma's childlike excitement at discovering a secret momentarily overcame her caution. She pushed the door open, entering the library with an innocent smile. Aunt Harriet, she exclaimed excitedly, what cool plan is this that you have? Can I join? Let's call Uncle Charles too. The phone slipped from Harriet's hands, falling with a dull thud on the thick carpet. Her face visibly paled, and for a moment it seemed her legs would give way. Emma, she stammered, her voice trembling. How long have you been there? I just got here, the girl replied, still smiling, although something inside her sounded a danger alarm. Lucky, by her side, began to growl softly, sensing the change in the room's atmosphere. Harriet quickly regained her composure. Her face regained its sweet expression from before, but her eyes now had a different gleam. Dear, she said, her voice returning to its honeyed tone, come with me for a moment. I need to show you something very special. The hallway grew darker with each step, the windows becoming increasingly scarce. Harriet kept a firm grip on Emma's arm, guiding her to a small room at the back of the mansion. It was a seldom-used room, full of furniture covered with white sheets. So, dear, Harriet began, her voice now stripped of any sweetness, we're going to have a very important conversation about what you just overheard. She closed the door behind them with a soft click. Lucky tried to position himself between the two, growling. Emma felt the fear growing in her chest, but years on the streets had taught her to remain calm in dangerous situations. Aunt Harriet, she tried, her voice trembling slightly, I didn't quite understand what you were saying on the phone. I swear I didn't. The governess let out a dry laugh, a sound that had nothing of her previous kindness. Oh, but you understood enough to be a problem. She leaned in, her face now close to Emma's. And do you know what happens to problems in this house? They disappear. I won't tell anyone anything, Emma whispered, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Lucky kept growling, his hair standing on end, ready to defend his little protector. Of course you won't, Harriet agreed, her smile now a frightening mask. Because if you say a word, a single word about what you heard, your furry friend here will have an accident. Her eyes fixed on Lucky with calculated cruelty. Panic took over Emma. No, she exclaimed, hugging Lucky protectively. Please don't hurt him. I promise I won't tell anything. I promise. Tears now flowed freely down her face. Good. We understand each other, said Harriet, returning to her falsely sweet tone. Now, let's establish some rules. First, you will smile and look happy when Mr. Charles returns. Second, if anyone asks, you never saw me on the phone. And third, she paused, if you break any of these rules, your dog will disappear. Forever. Emma nodded frantically, clutching Lucky to her. The dog had stopped growling but kept his eyes fixed on Harriet, as if he understood every word of the threat. Great, Harriet smiled, smoothing her apron as if nothing had happened. "Now let's get back to that bath Mr. Charles asked for. And remember, dear," she opened the door, "I'm always watching you, and your little friend." Emma followed the governess back through the mansion's hallways, her body trembling slightly. What should have been a day of luck and hope had turned into a nightmare. As she walked, a single question echoed in her mind. How could she protect Lucky and help the kind Charles at the same time? Harriet's steps echoed against the marble floor, creating an eerie symphony that seemed to accompany their every movement. The light entering through the tall windows cast elongated shadows on the walls, bringing life to the old paintings that silently watched them. The scent of wax and cleaning products, which had once felt welcoming, now had a suffocating touch. Emma could feel Lucky's fur brushing against her leg with each step, a constant reminder of what was at stake. Her fingers nervously intertwined at the hem of her soiled shirt, and she could feel her heart beating so hard it seemed to want to escape her chest. The bitter taste of fear mingled with the flavor of the soup she had eaten not long ago. The mansion's main hallway seemed endless, each closed door guarding its own secrets. Harriet's shoes marked a steady rhythm ahead, clack, 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 like a metronome keeping time with her anguish. The governess's impeccable uniform, once a symbol of order and care, now seemed a disguise concealing her true nature. A gentle breeze came in through one of the open windows, making the silk curtains sway softly. The sudden movement startled Emma, making her jump slightly. Harriet turned briefly, her false smile still in place, but her eyes carrying a silent threat that made the girl swallow hard. The antique clock in the hallway struck 3 in the afternoon, its deep chimes reverberating off the walls. Every sound seemed to amplify the tension of the moment, reminding Emma that time ran inexorably. In a few hours, Charles would return, and she would have to play the role of a happy, carefree child, while carrying the weight of a terrible secret. Lucky remained on high alert, his ears attentive to every movement of Harriet's, as if he could sense the true intentions behind the governess's mask of kindness. His fur was still slightly bristled, and every now and then a low growl escaped his throat, quickly silenced by a sharp look from Harriet. The mansion's luxury, which had initially enchanted Emma, now seemed a gilded cage. The Venetian mirrors, the crystal vases, the Persian rugs, everything reflected an opulence that cruelly contrasted with the terror she felt. Her bare feet, still dirty from the street, left almost imperceptible marks on the immaculate floor, like a trail of her passage through this world that clearly did not want her there. The gentle rumble of a luxury engine broke the tranquility of the afternoon at the Dawson mansion. A sleek black car crossed the main gates, laden with suitcases and bags from the most prestigious European stores. Abigail Walker, Charles's fiancée, was returning from her trip abroad. The young woman stepped out of the car, with the studied elegance of one who knows her own worth. Her long black hair framed a face of classical beauty, and her designer dress embraced her curves perfectly. Her high heels clicked against the marble entrance as she supervised the driver unloading her extensive luggage. "Harriet," she called, her melodious voice tinged with authority. "I need help with my purchases." Her eyes scanned the mansion's facade with possessive satisfaction until something unexpected caught her attention. Through one of the ground floor windows, she saw a scene that made her freeze in place. Emma, now clean and dressed in simple but presentable clothes, played with Lucky in the living room. The dog, also visibly cleaner, wagged his tail happily as the girl petted him. For many, the scene could have been touching, but not for Abigail. "What does this mean?" she whispered, her pretty face contorting into an expression of disgust. At that moment, Charles emerged from the house, his face lighting up when he saw his fiancée. He approached to embrace her, but she subtly recoiled, her eyes fixed on the window. "Darling, it's good you're back," he smiled, oblivious to her disturbance. "How was your trip?" Abigail did not answer immediately, her well-manicured fingers gripping the handle of her designer handbag with enough force to turn her knuckles white. "Charles," her voice trembled slightly with contained indignation, "why is there a beggar in our living room?" The last term came out as if it was something particularly unpleasant to pronounce. Her eyes could not look away from the scene that so disturbed her. The businessman followed her gaze, and his smile softened as he saw Emma. "Ah, that's an incredible story," he began, his tone enthusiastic. "I found her today downtown. She saved this puppy from being run over, risking her own life. She has a heart of gold despite all the hardships she's already faced. Abigail listened to the account with growing horror. Each word of admiration that Charles directed at the girl seemed a personal affront. "And you brought her into our home?" she asked, trying to maintain her composure. "Dear, there are institutions for this kind of, situation." "Don't worry," Charles replied, misinterpreting her concern. "I've already spoken to my lawyer. We'll find a good home for her. But in the meantime, I couldn't leave her on the street, not after what I saw today." The fiancée forced an understanding smile, although her eyes remained cold. "Of course, my love, you're always so kind." Her words were sweet, but there was something in her tone that suggested this kindness was not necessarily an admirable quality. "Come," invited Charles, offering his arm. "I'll introduce you to Emma. I'm sure you'll like her as much as I do." Abigail accepted the offered arm, but each step towards the living room seemed to cost her an immense effort. In the living room, Emma rose quickly upon seeing Charles returning with an unknown woman. Years on the streets had taught her to read people, and something in that elegant young woman's gaze made her instinctively take a step back. Lucky, sensing her tension, protectively took up position by her side. "Emma," Charles smiled, oblivious to the tension in the air, "I want you to meet Abigail, my fiancée." The girl attempted a shy smile, her hands nervously gripping the hem of the clean blouse Harriet had given her. The contrast between them could not be greater. Abigail in her impeccable designer dress, Emma in simple albeit clean clothes. "Pleased to meet you, ma'am," Emma murmured, her voice almost a whisper. Abigail merely inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement, her perfectly painted lips contorted into a forced smile. The silence that followed was as heavy as lead. "Charles, darling," Abigail finally spoke, her voice sweet but with a sharp note, "we need to talk about this in private." Her fingers closed possessively around her fiancé's arm, while her eyes cast barely concealed looks of distaste at Lucky, who had left a small paw print on the Persian rug. The businessman finally seemed to notice the tension. "Of course, love." He turned to Emma with a reassuring smile. "Make yourself at home, little one. Harriet should be around if you need anything." He allowed himself to be guided by Abigail to his office, closing the door behind them. In the confines of the office, Abigail dropped her mask of civility. "How could you bring a beggar into our home?" she questioned, her voice trembling with indignation. "And with a stray dog, no less. This is... She gestured nervously, searching for words strong enough to express her horror. "Abigail," Charles tried to calm her, "it's only temporary. The girl needs help, and we're in a position to help. What harm can there be in that?" He approached her, trying to touch her, but she shied away, pacing agitated around the office. "What harm? Charles, you don't understand. These people, they bring trouble. They always bring trouble. And that dog," she visibly shuddered, "it's probably riddled with diseases. I can't believe you're putting our safety at risk because of a charitable whim." Charles sighed deeply, massaging his temples. "Dear, you're overreacting. Emma is just a child in need of help. And as for the dog, I've already called a veterinarian to examine it. Trust me, it's all under control." "Under control?" she repeated, her voice rising an octave. "None of this is under control. This is our home, Charles. Ours. Not a homeless shelter." Her eyes gleamed dangerously, a mixture of anger and something else, fear perhaps, that her carefully laid plans might be threatened by this unexpected intrusion. The sound of a ringing phone interrupted the argument in the office. "I need to take this call," said Charles, checking the caller ID on his cell phone. "It's the lawyer. It might be about Emma's situation." With one last concerned look at his fiancée, he quickly exited the office. Abigail waited a few seconds after the door closed, ensuring she was alone. With quick, determined steps, she crossed the mansion in search of Harriet. She found the housekeeper in the kitchen, overseeing the preparation of dinner. "Where is the girl?" Abigail asked in a low voice, dismissing the maids with a brusque gesture. Once they were alone, her demeanor changed completely. The mask of refinement gave way to an expression of contained fury. "In the guest room taking a shower," Harriet responded, her own facade of servile housekeeper gradually fading. "How was the trip, my child?" Her tone now carried an intimacy no one in the mansion had ever witnessed. "How have things been here, Mother?" Abigail asked, taking a seat at the kitchen table. "Is Charles still as smitten as before?" Her perfectly manicured nails drummed nervously on the marble surface. Harriet smoothed her apron with a satisfied smile. "Oh yes, don't you worry. I've been singing your praises all day, talking about what a wonderful wife you'll make." "He's more enamored than ever." She paused, her face taking on a worried expression. "But we have a small problem." "What problem?" Abigail straightened in her chair, tense. "Besides this beggar he brought into our home?" "The girl. She overheard me on the phone earlier," Harriet admitted, lowering her voice even further. "She knows there's a plan. She doesn't know the details, but—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Abigail's face visibly paled. "How did you let this happen?" she hissed, leaning over the table, her fingers gripping the marble edge so tightly her knuckles turned white. "After all our careful planning, all our precautions, a street urchin could ruin everything." Harriet raised her hands in a placating gesture, her wrinkled face etched with worry. The distant sound of the shower upstairs was a constant reminder of the unwanted presence. "Keep your voice down, please," she whispered, her nervous eyes darting towards the door. "Walls have ears in this house." "Don't tell me to lower my voice," Abigail retorted, though she reduced her tone to a furious whisper. "Years, Mother. Years planning every detail. The church friend's story, the casual meetings with Charles, every smile, every gesture." She began to pace around the kitchen, her heels striking a nervous rhythm on the floor. "I've taken care of the situation," Harriet insisted, nervously adjusting her graying bun. "I threatened her. You should have seen the terror in her eyes when I mentioned the dog. She's terrified something will happen to that mangy mutt." A noise in the hallway made the two freeze for a moment. When it became clear it was just one of the maids passing by, Abigail resumed, her voice even lower but laced with venom. "And you think fear is enough? A street child, Mother? They're like rats. They always find a way, always find a way." "I can increase the surveillance," Harriet offered, her hands twisting her immaculate apron. "Not leave her alone for a minute. Maybe even lock her room at night." Abigail rose abruptly from her chair, knocking it over in the process. Her hands trembled not just with anger, but with a deep fear of seeing her dreams crumble. "It's not enough. We can't take risks, not when we're so close. The wedding is in 2 weeks, Mother. 2 weeks. "But daughter, think it through," Harriet tried to reason, picking up the fallen chair. "Charles is providing documents for her. If she disappears just like that, out of nowhere—" Her dark eyes conveyed genuine concern for the possible consequences. "I don't care," Abigail cut her off, spinning on her heels to face her mother. Her face, usually so controlled, was twisted into a mask of fury that revealed her true nature. "Make it happen. Use your contacts, that kennel friend of yours, anything." The sound of running water upstairs stopped, heightening the tension in the room. Abigail stepped closer to her mother, gripping her arms with force. "Listen carefully," she whispered, each word laden with cruel determination. "I didn't let you degrade yourself as a maid all these years, just to lose everything now because of some meddling beggar. You didn't clean toilets and serve coffee for 5 years, only to see our plan go down the drain." Harriet nodded slowly, her features hardening with a grim resolve. The sound of childish footsteps overhead served as an urgent reminder of the threat looming over their plans. "I'll take care of it," she promised, her voice taking on a tone that left no doubt about her intentions. "By the end of this week, that girl will be nothing but a distant memory." Morning came to the Dawson mansion, bringing a heavy silence to the breakfast table. The dining room, with its immaculate elegance, seemed to amplify every little sound. The clinking of porcelain cups, the chime of silver cutlery against plates, and Emma's stifled breathing as she barely touched her food. Harriet circled the table with her usual efficiency, serving coffee to Charles and tea to Abigail. Her movements were precise and silent, but her eyes never stopped watching Emma for a second. The girl kept her head down, idly stirring her porridge while Lucky rested quietly at her feet. Abigail, impeccable in her silk robe, cast barely disguised looks of disgust toward the girl whenever Charles wasn't looking. Her fingers drummed impatiently on the table, as if Emma's mere presence made the air unbreathable. "The coffee is delicious today, Harriet," she commented, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. Charles lowered his newspaper, finally noticing Emma's unusual behavior. The girl who yesterday had shown such liveliness in saving Lucky now seemed a shadow of herself. Her shoulders were tense, and she occasionally shot nervous glances toward Harriet. "Emma," he called gently, making the girl start. "Is everything all right? You seem so quiet today." His kind eyes searched hers, genuinely concerned about the change in her demeanor. The little beggar girl opened her mouth to respond, her eyes momentarily filling with unshed tears, but Harriet was quicker. The governess approached the table with a pitcher of juice, strategically positioning herself between Emma and Charles. "Oh, sir," Harriet intervened, her motherly smile perfectly rehearsed. "It's only natural she'd be like this. Reality here is so different from the streets. She must be scared by so much change all at once." Her words sounded reasonable, but there was a veiled threat in her eyes when they met Emma's. Charles nodded thoughtfully, accepting the explanation. "It makes sense," he agreed, turning to Emma with a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, little one. You'll get used to all this soon." "Darling," Abigail interjected, placing her hand delicately on his, "shouldn't we go to the confectionery? Remember we scheduled to choose the wedding sweets today?" Her tone was soft, but there was an underlying urgency in her words. The businessman consulted his gold watch. "You're right, and we're almost running late." He rose, planting a gentle kiss on his fiancée's forehead. "Harriet, take good care of Emma and Lucky while we're out." The governess gave a small curtsy, her face a mask of servility. "Leave it to me, sir. I'll tend to everything personally." Under the table, Lucky let out a low, almost inaudible growl, as if sensing what was to come. "We'll be back soon," Charles bid farewell, holding the door for Abigail to pass. The bride-to-be cast one last meaningful look at Harriet before leaving, her words from the night before still hanging in the air like a sentence. The sound of Charles's car had barely faded into the distance when Harriet's transformation began. Her face, once a mask of maternal sweetness, hardened like granite. Her eyes, which had once conveyed false kindness, now shone with a cruelty that made Emma shrink back in her chair. "So," the governess began, her voice sharp as a blade of ice, "finding the food too good for your taste, street urchin." With a brusque motion, she snatched the still full plate of porridge from in front of Emma. The sound of porcelain striking the table made the girl flinch. Lucky leapt up immediately, his fur standing on end and a low growl escaping his throat. Harriet shot a threatening glare at the dog. "Ah, and your little friend still thinks he can scare me." She let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Let's see how long that bravado lasts when you two are locked up. Please, Mrs. "Harriet," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. "We haven't done anything wrong." Her small hands gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white with tension. The governess circled the table like a predator closing in on its prey. "Nothing wrong? Your very presence here is wrong enough." She grabbed Emma's arm roughly, yanking her from the chair. "And now we'll make sure you don't cause any more trouble." Dragging the girl through the mansion's corridors, with Lucky following anxiously, Harriet climbed the stairs to the guest room. Her grip on Emma's arm was tight enough to leave marks, but the girl dared not make a sound. "Here," Harriet declared, shoving Emma into the room, "is where you'll stay until I decide what to do with you." Lucky quickly followed his small charge inside, still growling at the governess. With a swift motion, Harriet closed the door, the sound of the key turning in the lock echoing like a final sentence. "And don't bother screaming," her voice came through the thick wood. "No one will hear you up here." Emma ran to the window, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was on the second floor, but years on the streets had taught her to find escapes where no one else would see them. A trellis covered in ivy trailed down the side wall, sturdy enough to support her weight. "Lucky," she whispered, stroking the dog's head, "I need you to stay quiet here. I'll find a way to get us out of this, I promise." The animal looked at her with intelligent eyes, as if understanding every word. With agile movements learned on the streets, Emma carefully climbed down the ivy-covered trellis, descending the wall with her bare feet, finding natural holds in the irregularities of the brickwork, while her fingers gripped the wooden frame tightly. Her heart raced, not from physical exertion but from the fear of being discovered. Once on the ground, Emma crouched among the garden bushes, watching for any movement in the house. The distant sound of dishes being washed indicated Harriet was in the kitchen. With silent steps, the girl skirted around the mansion until she found a side entrance used by servants for deliveries. The interior of the house was quiet, save for the occasional clink of dishware coming from the kitchen. Emma moved like a shadow through the corridors, her watchful eyes scanning for anything that could serve as a key. Years of living on the streets had honed her survival instincts, teaching her how to move unnoticed. A well-worn leather bag sat on a chair in the service hallway. Emma recognized it as belonging to Harriet. The governess always carried it with her during her daily tasks. With trembling fingers, the girl began to search the bag's interior, careful not to disarrange anything. She didn't find the key she sought, but her fingers brushed against something else, an old photograph tucked inside a battered wallet. As she pulled it out to examine it more closely, Emma felt her heart skip a beat. In the time-yellowed image, a younger Harriet smiled alongside Abigail. On the back, a handwritten message read, "Memories of a lovely trip." The sound of approaching footsteps made Emma freeze. With quick, precise movements, she tucked the photo into the pocket of her dress and replaced the bag exactly as she had found it. But when she turned to seek a hiding spot, her blood ran cold. Harriet stood in the hallway entrance, her dark eyes fixed on Emma like a snake about to strike. "How did you get out of the room?" she hissed, her voice laced with a contained fury more chilling than any shout. I just wanted to save Lucky," Emma stammered, her body visibly trembling. "He's all alone up there, scared." Her back pressed against the wall as Harriet advanced slowly. "Did you touch anything?" the governess asked, her eyes darting quickly between Emma and her bag. The girl shook her head frantically, feeling the weight of the photograph in her pocket as if it were made of lead. "No, ma'am, I swear," she lied, her voice barely above a whisper. Harriet studied her for a long moment, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. The silence that followed hung as heavy as a shroud. With a sudden movement, Harriet grabbed Emma's arm. "Let's see if you learn to stay where you belong, you meddling little pest," she snarled, dragging the girl back up the stairs. Emma didn't resist, knowing it would be useless. Back in the room, Harriet pushed Emma inside with enough force to make her stumble. Her feet tangled in the Persian rug, and she fell to her knees with a dull thud. Lucky ran to his little friend, growling at the governess, his fur standing on end and teeth bared in a clear display of protection. "This time," Harriet warned, her voice as cold as winter, "I'll make sure you don't escape." Her eyes scanned the room methodically, assessing every possible escape route. She approached the window with decisive steps, locking it and drawing the heavy velvet curtains, plunging the room into a stifling gloom. The metallic sound of locks being checked echoed through the room, followed by the heavy dragging of furniture from outside. The old oak dresser made a harsh noise against the floor as Harriet positioned it against the door. "And remember," her voice came through the wood one last time, laden with malice, "if you try any more tricks, your dog will pay the price." Footsteps receded down the hallway, the sound of the governess's heels gradually fading until swallowed by the oppressive silence of the mansion. Emma remained motionless for a few moments, her heart beating so hard it seemed to want to escape her chest. The room, which had once seemed like just a guest bedroom, now transformed into a suffocating prison. The shadows cast by the furniture took on threatening shapes on the walls, and the ticking of the clock above the fireplace marked time with cruel precision. Lucky moved closer to Emma, his warm body offering the only comfort available at that moment. The girl buried her fingers in the dog's soft fur, drawing strength from his constant presence. The photo in her pocket seemed to burn against her skin like a red-hot iron, tangible proof that something was very wrong in that house. Her fingers trembled as she touched the paper through the fabric of her dress, fearing that even that small movement could be noticed by Harriet. The weight of that secret felt even heavier now, locked between four walls. The morning sun tried to penetrate through the closed curtains, creating a diffuse pattern of light that barely illuminated the room. The air was becoming heavy, and Emma could feel beads of cold sweat running down her back. The fear was no longer just for herself or Lucky. Now there was also concern for Charles, who had no idea of the danger surrounding him in his own home. Sitting on the floor of the now truly locked room, hugging Lucky as if he were her last anchor of sanity, Emma tried desperately to organize her thoughts. The silent tears streaming down her face were as much from fear as from frustration. In her small, calloused hands from life on the streets, now rested not only her own fate, but also that of her faithful friend and the kind man who had tried to help her. The silence of the mansion was occasionally broken by distant sounds, the clinking of dishes, muffled footsteps, indistinct voices of the servants. Each noise made Emma start, fearing Harriet's return. The walls of the room seemed to close in on her, turning what should have been a refuge into a suffocating trap. The afternoon sun had already begun to set when Charles's car passed through the mansion's gates. Emma was sitting quietly in the main room, Lucky lying at her feet, as if the hours of terror in the locked room had never existed. The sound of Abigail's elegant footsteps echoed through the entrance hall, followed by Charles's animated voice discussing the sweets chosen for the wedding. "Emma!" Charles exclaimed as he entered the room, his face lighting up at the sight of the girl. "How was your day?" Harriet emerged silently from the kitchen, positioning herself strategically behind the armchair where Emma was sitting. The girl felt a chill run down her spine at the governess's presence. "Well, sir," she replied softly, her fingers discreetly tightening on Lucky's fur. The dog, always sensitive to his little protector's emotional state, remained alert, though appearing relaxed. "Harriet took very good care of us." Abigail removed her Italian leather gloves with precise gestures, barely concealing her irritation at the girl's presence. "Darling," her voice as sweet as artificial honey, "how about we get some air in the garden? The sunset must be magnificent today." The backyard garden was a spectacle of colors at dusk, with its carefully pruned rose bushes and marble fountain reflecting the last golden rays of the day. Charles led his fiancée through the flower beds, completely absorbed in her beauty and seemingly oblivious to the shadows moving in the corners of his life. "I couldn't be happier," he declared, holding Abigail's hands in his own. "The wedding, you, our life together. Sometimes I wonder how I got so lucky." His eyes shone with genuine love, making the scene even more painful for those who knew the truth. Emma, who had silently followed the couple, hid behind a large hydrangea bush. Lucky, understanding the need for silence, remained quiet at her side. Through the leaves, the girl watched the scene unfold like a macabre spectacle. Harriet appeared carrying a tray with glasses of juice, her uniform impeccable and her servile smile perfectly calculated. "May I serve you something refreshing?" she offered, approaching the couple with soft steps. "Ah, Harriet," exclaimed Charles, accepting a glass. "I was just thinking about you. I never properly thanked you for introducing Abigail to me. That friend of yours from church. Who would have thought she would bring me so much happiness?" The governess lowered her head in a studied display of humility. "Oh, sir, you don't need to thank me. It was God who put you in each other's path. I was merely a divine instrument, a little Cupid in this love story." "Still," insisted Charles, his voice laden with sincere emotion, "you changed my life by bringing Abigail into it. I'll never forget that." The sun had finally set completely, plunging the garden into elongated shadows. Charles consulted his gold watch, frowning slightly. "I need to check some documents in the office before bed," he said, gently kissing Abigail's hand. "The wedding preparations cannot delay business." As soon as Charles's footsteps disappeared inside the mansion, the atmosphere in the garden changed drastically. Harriet's servile smile transformed into an expression of malicious complicity, while Abigail dropped her mask of smitten bride. "My daughter," whispered Harriet, approaching Abigail with an intimacy she never displayed in public. "We are so close to completing our plan." Her wrinkled hands caressed her daughter's face with perverse pride. "Tomorrow, at this same time, you will be the lady of this mansion." Abigail laughed softly, a sound devoid of any genuine joy. "And that fool doesn't even suspect, Mother, so preoccupied with the wedding suites, with the party details." She spun slowly, observing the garden with possessive eyes. "Soon all this will be ours." 5 years, continued Harriet, her voice laden with bitterness and triumph. 5 years serving coffee, dusting, pretending to be a humble governess. Every day of humiliation was worth it to see you conquer this empire." Her eyes shone with barely restrained ambition. "And after I get married," added Abigail, walking among the rose bushes, "I'll make sure half his fortune is transferred to my name. That idiot lawyer has already prepared all the prenuptial agreement documents." The two women approached the fountain, their malicious laughter echoing into the night like an ominous omen. "Just imagine, Mother," continued Abigail, "in a few months, I'll be able to dismiss Mrs. Harriet, the faithful governess, with a generous pension. No one will ever suspect." A sudden movement behind the hydrangeas caught Harriet's attention. Her eyes narrowed dangerously, focusing on the bush. "Quiet," she whispered to Abigail, raising a hand in warning. Emma, hidden behind the vegetation, felt her heart freeze. She tried to remain absolutely still, but Lucky, perhaps sensing the impending danger, let out a low, nervous bark. "There!" exclaimed Harriet, moving with surprising agility for her age. Abigail circled the bush from the other side, cornering Emma in her hiding spot. The little beggar jumped up, trying to escape, but her legs were trembling so much she could barely stand. Lucky stood in front of her, growling at the two approaching women. "Well, well," Harriet's voice was as cold as the falling night. "It seems our little intruder discovered more than she should have." Her fingers closed like claws on Emma's arm. "And this time, my dear, there is no escape." "What shall we do with her?" hissed Abigail, her eyes sparking with hatred. "She knows too much now. She knows about us, about the plan." Her perfectly manicured fingers nervously clutched the pearl necklace at her throat. Harriet kept a firm grip on Emma's arm while her brain worked quickly. "My friend Virginia," she said after a moment's consideration, "the one who lives in the isolated house on the city limits. She's always been discreet about our affairs." Emma tried to break free, but the governess's grip was like iron. "Please," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face, "I won't tell anyone anything. Just let me and Lucky go, that's all." "Shut up," growled Abigail, bringing her face close to Emma's. "You think we're going to trust a beggar?" Her beautiful face was contorted into a mask of cruelty. "Mother, we need to act fast. Charles could come back at any moment." With chilling efficiency, Harriet began dragging Emma toward the back garage. Lucky tried to defend his little friend, but Abigail was already prepared. With a quick motion, she trapped the dog with a collar she had picked up from the garden. "Virginia's car is parked behind the garage," whispered Harriet. "She came earlier to bring the arrangements from Walker for the wedding. Always providential, isn't it?" Her smile was icy as she opened the vehicle's door. "After the wedding," she continued, pushing Emma into the car, "when I'm officially the lady of this house, we'll take care of you and that dog once and for all." Abigail handed Lucky over to her mother, who unceremoniously threw him next to Emma. An older woman Emma didn't know was already behind the wheel. Her eyes in the rearview mirror showed no compassion for the scene unfolding. "Keep them quiet," Harriet ordered her friend, "and don't let them escape under any circumstances. Tomorrow after the ceremony we'll resolve this situation permanently. No one will miss another beggar on the streets," Abigail added with a cruel smile. "And as for the dog, well, accidents happen every day, don't they?" The car began to move silently through the night, taking Emma and Lucky away from the mansion. The last sight the girl had was of Harriet and Abigail, mother and daughter, embracing and laughing, their silhouettes cut out against the light coming from the big house. As the vehicle moved away along the dark road, Emma hugged Lucky tightly, her tears wetting the dog's fur. The wedding would be tomorrow, and after that, she didn't want to think about what could happen. Somewhere inside that car, following increasingly deserted streets, the little beggar desperately tried to find a way to save not only her own life and Lucky's, but also that of the kind man who had tried to help her. The city lights were becoming more and more distant, swallowed up by the encroaching darkness of the night. The car followed a dirt road, shaking violently with every pothole. Virginia kept her eyes fixed on the road, her face hardened by age and complicity, in so many shady secrets showing the same coldness as Harriet's. Lucky remained alert, his intelligent eyes alternating between Emma and the driver, as if calculating the possibilities of escape. His fur was still bristling, and a low, constant growl emanated from his throat, warning Virginia to keep her distance. The inside of the car smelled of wilted walkeras, remnants of the wedding arrangements Virginia had delivered earlier. The scent, which should have been sweet, now seemed suffocating to Emma. Each breath reminded her of the time running out, the precious hours remaining until the ceremony that would seal not only Charles's fate, but her own as well. Emma's small, calloused hands trembled as she stroked Lucky, seeking both comfort and courage. The photograph she still carried in her pocket seemed to weigh a ton. The proof of the relationship between Harriet and Abigail now seemed insignificant in the face of the real danger they faced. The car made a sharp turn, revealing an old and poorly maintained house, partially hidden by tall, twisted trees. A single yellowish light shone in one of the windows, like a watchful eye in the darkness. Virginia slowed down, and the gravel under the tires made a threatening sound. "We're here," Virginia announced, her rasping voice breaking the silence for the first time since they had left. "And there's no point trying to run, girl." There's nothing but thick woods for miles around. Her eyes met Emma's in the rearview mirror, cold and determined. Harriet told me about your escape skills. The car engine fell silent, plunging everything into an oppressive quiet. Only the nighttime sounds of the Walkerer and Lucky's heavy breathing broke the stillness. Emma tightened her arms around her faithful friend, feeling the comforting warmth of his body against the chill that had settled not only in the air, but in her soul. The house loomed before them like a somber sentinel, its dark windows seeming to watch them with silent malevolence. Somewhere within those walls, Emma and Lucky would spend their possibly last hours together, while at the mansion, miles away, preparations for a wedding that was nothing but a cruel trap would continue cheerfully. "You know, sir," Harriet continued, approaching with soft steps, "earlier when I was brushing her hair, I noticed something in her gaze. She confided in me that she missed the streets, that was the life she knew." The lie flowed from her lips with the smoothness of poisoned honey. "But here she had everything," Charles protested, his voice heavy with sadness. "Food, a roof, security." "Sometimes," Harriet philosophized, her melodious voice laden with false wisdom, "it's not about what we have, but about where we feel at home, the reality of the mansion, all this luxury." Perhaps it was too frightening for someone accustomed to such a different life. The millionaire fell silent for a few moments, absorbing the governess's words. His eyes swept over the luxurious room, seeing it now through a new perspective, how it must appear to a child of the streets. "Perhaps I should have been more patient," he murmured, more to himself than to Harriet, given her more time to adapt. "You did everything you could," Harriet consoled, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You were generous, kind, but some people simply aren't ready for such major changes." Charles rose slowly, walking to the window. The night outside was dark and cold, and his heart ached to think of Emma and Lucky wandering the city streets again. "After the wedding," he said finally, his voice firm despite the sadness, "I'll dedicate time to searching for them. Perhaps we can try again more slowly this time." "A wise decision, sir," Harriet agreed, suppressing a triumphant smile. "Now why don't you go rest? Tomorrow will be a big day, and you need to be rested for the ceremony." Charles nodded absent-mindedly, his thoughts still with the little beggar and her faithful companion. As he climbed the stairs toward his room, he didn't notice the gleam of satisfaction in Harriet's eyes, nor hear the sigh of relief she let out. The governess remained in the room for a few more moments, savoring her victory. Tomorrow, when the church bells rang out announcing the wedding, the last threat to her plans would be taken care of by Virginia, too far away to prevent anything. "Sleep well, sir," she murmured to the empty stairs, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "Tomorrow your life as a blissfully ignorant fool will begin, never knowing that your little protégé discovered the truth too late to save you." The night advanced slowly in the old house on the city limits, where the silence was broken only by the muffled sound of a television upstairs. Virginia had locked Emma and Lucky in the damp and poorly lit basement, a large space filled with covered furniture and dusty boxes casting sinister shadows on the wooden walls. Emma kept her ear pressed against the basement door, trying to discern her jailer's movements. The sound of the evening soap opera echoed faintly through the floor, along with the occasional comments Virginia made to herself about the plot. The girl had already noticed that, as the night progressed, the elderly woman's voice became more and more drowsy. "We need to be very quiet, Lucky," she whispered, stroking the dog's head as he clung to her side. The darkness of the basement was cut only by a single dim lamp hanging from the ceiling, creating a yellowish circle of light that barely illuminated the surroundings. The air smelled of mold and old wood, and the night's chill was beginning to seep through the cracks in the walls. The hours dragged on like an eternity. Emma carefully explored the basement, her bare feet moving silently across the wooden floor. Every corner, every box could hide something useful for her escape. Her eyes, now accustomed to the dim light, methodically examined every detail of the environment, while her ears remained alert to the sounds coming from above. A different noise caught her attention, the unmistakable sound of a snore. Virginia had finally fallen asleep in front of the television, overcome by fatigue and the monotony of the late-night programming. Emma felt her heart race. It was the opportunity they had been waiting for. "Now, buddy," she murmured to Lucky, who immediately became more alert, his ears moving at every little sound. "Let's find a way out of here." The dog wagged his tail in response, as if he perfectly understood the importance of that moment. With calculated steps, Emma began a more thorough search of the basement. Her fingers slid across the walls, looking for any weakness, any possibility of escape. It was then that she found, partially hidden behind an old bookcase, a thick, long rope, perfectly suitable for an escape. The discovery of the rope filled her heart with hope, but they still needed an exit. Lucky, as if sensing the urgency of the moment, began to sniff the floor near one of the walls. His behavior caught Emma's attention, and she silently approached. There, partially obscured by a pile of old boxes, was a loose board in the baseboard of the wall. The years had loosened the nails, creating an opening that, although small, could be widened enough for her to pass through. "Good boy," she whispered, hugging Lucky. "You always know what to do, don't you?" Virginia's snores continued regularly upstairs, providing a strange soundtrack to their escape efforts. Emma knew she had to act quickly. At any moment the old woman could wake up, and then her chance would be lost forever. With meticulous care, Emma began working on the loose board. Her fingers, calloused from years of street life, found the weak points of the wood with instinctive precision. Every movement was calculated to make as little noise as possible, while Lucky kept watch, his ears alert to any change in Virginia's snores. The old wood protested silently under her efforts, small splinters breaking off as she widened the opening. Sweat trickled down her face despite the cold, and her muscles ached from the restrained effort. A rusty nail scratched her arm, but she stifled the cry of pain, aware that a single sound could ruin everything. "Almost there," she whispered to herself, as one last part of the board gave way under her persistent pressure. The opening was now wide enough for her and Lucky to pass through, although it would be a tight squeeze. Above, the sound of the television continued its monotonous murmur, punctuated by Virginia's ever-deepening snores. The cold night wind blew through the opening, bringing with it the smell of freedom. Emma worked quickly with the rope, tying one end around her waist and preparing the other end for Lucky. Her hands trembled slightly, but her movements were precise. On the streets, she had learned that a poorly tied knot could mean the difference between escaping and getting caught. A sudden creak from the floor above made the two freeze. Virginia's snores had momentarily stopped, and the sound of a creaking armchair indicated movement. Emma held her breath, her heart pounding so hard it seemed it would be heard through the ceiling. Seconds that felt like hours dragged on in tense silence. Then gradually the snores resumed, and Emma released the air she hadn't even realized she was holding. "That was close," she murmured to Lucky, who kept his eyes fixed on the ceiling, as if he could see through it. Passing through the opening required delicate precision. First was Lucky, who contorted himself through the space with surprising agility. Emma followed, feeling the rough edges of the wood scraping her back as she forced herself through the small opening. The cold night air struck her face like a slap when she finally emerged on the other side. They were in a small space between the house and an old fence, the shadows of nearby trees offering a welcome cover. Emma quickly checked the knots of the rope on both of them, ensuring they were secure. Freedom was within reach, but a new challenge presented itself: which direction to go. The darkness of night made it difficult to recognize any landmarks, and time was against them. Somewhere in that town, preparations for a marriage based on lies continued, and only they could prevent Charles from falling into Harriet and Abigail's trap. A sound from inside the house made Emma hold her breath again. The television had been turned off. It was now or never. With her heart pounding, Emma and Lucky slipped away from the house, keeping to the shadows. The night was clear, with a waxing moon providing just enough light for them to avoid obstacles in their path. The silence was broken only by the soft sound of their footsteps on the ground and the occasional jingle of the rope that bound them. The main road stretched ahead of them like a dark ribbon cutting through the landscape. Emma paused for a moment, her mind working feverishly. Which direction should they go? Charles's mansion could be anywhere, and she hadn't paid attention to the route when Virginia brought them. "Please, God," she whispered, her hands clasped in desperate prayer, "help us find the right way. Uncle Charles needs to know the truth before it's too late." Her words were carried by the cold night wind, as silent tears streamed down her face. It was then that Lucky began behaving differently. His snout lifted into the air, sniffing intently. His ears moved back and forth, as if picking up on something Emma couldn't perceive. The rope between them went taut as he began to pull in a specific direction. "What is it, Lucky?" she asked, watching her friend's unusual behavior. The dog continued sniffing the air, his eyes shining with a determination she knew well, the same determination he had shown on the day they met, when she had saved him from being run over. The moonlight dimly illuminated the path ahead, revealing a fork in the road. Lucky insistently pulled toward the right path, his whole body showing urgency. It was as if he recognized something, a scent or a memory that guided him. Emma hesitated for only a second before making her decision. On the streets, she had learned to trust the instincts of animals. They tended to be more reliable than many humans. "You know where you're going, don't you?" she whispered, stroking Lucky's head. The dog's response was immediate, a confident wag of his tail and another gentle tug on the rope. His eyes met hers in the darkness, conveying a certainty that warmed Emma's heart. Somehow, he knew the way. The distant sound of a car made them quickly hide behind some bushes. As they waited for the vehicle to pass, Emma hugged Lucky, feeling his comforting warmth. "Go on, my doggy," she whispered into his ear, her voice filled with renewed hope. "Let's go help our friend." And so, united by the rope and a common purpose, Emma and Lucky disappeared into the night, following a path that only the dog's instinct knew. Somewhere ahead of them lay the Dawson mansion, and with it, the chance to prevent a kind man's life from being destroyed by those he trusted most. "Shut your mouth," ordered Harriet. "Don't say another word on the phone. That little meddler will never find her way back to town in time, and even if she does," her voice took on a somber tone, "who would believe a beggar against the word of a respectable governess?" Virginia swallowed hard, watching the opening in the wall where Emma and Lucky had escaped. "What am I to do now?" "Nothing," Harriet replied coldly. "Absolutely nothing. Stay home and pray your incompetence hasn't ruined everything." With those words, the call was abruptly terminated. The phone slipped from Virginia's trembling fingers, falling onto the scattered bread on the floor. In the silence of the empty basement, she could hear the church bells in the distance, starting to chime to announce the beginning of another day. A day that, in a few hours, would witness a wedding founded on lies. The morning sun bathed the Church of Our Lady of Guadalupe in a golden light, making Walker's white flower arrangements glow like little earthly stars. The centuries-old building, with its pale stone walls and stained glass windows, was magnificently decorated for what promised to be the wedding of the year. Ribbons of white silk snaked between the dark wooden pews, and polished silver candlesticks reflected the light streaming in through the high windows, creating an ethereal and romantic atmosphere. Harriet oversaw the final preparations with the relentless efficiency that characterized her, although her mind was divided between the immediate tasks and the concern over Emma's escape. Her experienced hands adjusted the position of the crystal goblets on the main buffet table, while her restless eyes constantly scanned the surroundings, fearing at any moment to see a small, ragged figure emerge among the elegant guests who were beginning to arrive. "Everything is perfect," she muttered to herself, nervously adjusting her graying bun. "Nothing can go wrong now." Outside the church, Emma stumbled along the cobblestone road, her legs trembling with exhaustion after the long night's walk. Lucky, still tethered to the rope that bound them together, remained steadfast by her side, offering support whenever she threatened to falter. Her bare feet were bruised and dirty, but her eyes shone with determination as she caught sight of the church towers rising against the morning sky. "There, Lucky," she whispered, her voice hoarse with thirst. "We found it. Now we need to stop Uncle Charles from making the biggest mistake of his life." Inside the church, the musicians began to tune their instruments, producing soft notes that blended with the growing murmur of the guests. The ceremonial officer, a tall and elegant man in his impeccable suit, tested the microphone strategically positioned near the altar. His deep voice echoed through the sacred space. "Test, test. Attention! In 15 minutes we will begin the ceremony. Please, everyone, take your seats." Isolated in the bride's room, Abigail admired her reflection in the mirror as the makeup artist gave the final touches. The white dress, an exclusive model by a famous European designer, embraced her curves perfectly, transforming her into the vision of what seemed to be a perfect and passionate bride. Her fingers absent-mindedly caressed the bouquet of white roses on her lap, while a satisfied smile played on her painted lips. "After today," she thought, "half of his fortune will be mine, and that little intruder won't be able to do anything to stop it. Outside, Emma had found a sturdy tree near the side entrance of the church. With trembling fingers, she untied the rope that bound her to Lucky, whispering comforting words to her faithful companion. "Stay here, friend. I need to go in alone so as not to draw attention. I promise I'll be back soon." The dog obediently sat down, his intelligent eyes fixed on her, as if he understood the importance of that moment. Charles waited at the altar, impeccable in his Italian suit, conversing in a low voice with the priest. His eyes occasionally swept across the nearly full church, smiling politely at the arriving guests. In his pocket, a small velvet box held a diamond necklace, a surprise present for his bride, which he planned to give her after the ceremony. "Father," he commented, his voice laden with genuine emotion, "I never imagined I would find such love so late in life." The main doors of the church were fully opened, allowing the morning light to flood the central aisle. The ceremonial officer signaled to the musicians, who began to play a soft romantic melody. The guests rose in unison, turning toward the entrance, awaiting the moment when the bride would make her triumphant appearance. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced into the microphone, "please stand to receive the bride." Emma, who had managed to sneak into the church through a side door, observed everything hidden behind a massive column. Her heart was beating so hard that she feared it might be heard above the music. Her eyes moved quickly between Charles, standing confidently at the altar, and Harriet, who now positioned herself strategically near the entrance of the main aisle. The little beggar girl knew she had only one chance to stop this charade, and she needed to choose the exact moment. The first notes of the wedding march began to play, and Abigail appeared at the church entrance, radiant in her white dress. A murmur of admiration swept through the assembly as she began her walk down the central aisle, her calculated smile hiding the true nature of her intentions. "It's time," she thought, advancing with measured steps toward the altar. "In a few minutes, the whole plan will be complete." 10 minutes later, the priest began the ritual words that would initiate the ceremony. The silence in the church was absolute, broken only by the solemn voice of the clergyman and the occasional click of the camera shutters. Emma, still hidden, felt her heart tighten as she saw the genuine expression of happiness on Charles's face. "Forgive me, uncle," she whispered to herself, "but I can't let them destroy your life." The priest continued with the ceremony, his voice reverberating through the centuries-old arches of the church as he led the couple through their marriage vows. Abigail responded to the ritual questions with such well-rehearsed conviction that even the most skeptical of those present were deceived by her performance. Her words sounded as sweet as poisoned honey when she pronounced her "I do," while her eyes shone not with love, but with the anticipation of imminent victory. Harriet, observing from the front row, could barely contain a triumphant smile, her hands nervously clutching the fabric of her formal dress. The light passing through the stained glass created colorful patterns that danced over the guests, unaware of the drama that was about to unfold. The ceremonial officer had left the microphone resting on its stand near the side table, still on for the final moments of the ceremony. Emma watched that detail with special attention, her eyes alternating between the equipment and Charles's radiant face. The businessman smiled with such happiness that for a moment the girl hesitated, wondering if she would have the courage to destroy that apparent moment of joy. Sometimes the truth hurts, she thought, but lies hurt even more. The crucial moment was approaching. The priest was now addressing Charles, asking if he accepted Abigail as his lawful wife. The businessman's smile grew even wider, his eyes shining with tears of restrained emotion, as he began to pronounce the words that would seal his fate. "I." It was at that precise moment that Emma knew she could no longer wait. With the agility acquired on the streets, she moved like a shadow between the columns, approaching the microphone. Harriet was the first to notice the movement. Her eyes widened in panic as she recognized the small, ragged figure emerging from the shadows. She tried to stand up, but her legs seemed made of lead. Time seemed to have slowed down as she watched, powerless, as Emma reached the microphone. "No," the governess whispered, her voice almost inaudible. "It can't be." Emma's voice exploded through the church's speakers, cutting through the air like a thunderclap on a clear day. "No! This woman is the governess's daughter, and they want to rob you, uncle." The sound reverberated off the stone walls, amplified by the perfect acoustics of the sacred space. The silence that followed was deafening, as if all the air had been sucked out of the church in a single instant. The reaction of those present was immediate and chaotic. The guests turned in their chairs, some standing up to see better the source of that dramatic interruption. Abigail turned pale as her own wreath, her hands gripping the bouquet with such force that some rose petals fell onto the red carpet. Harriet, as if struck by a physical blow, staggered backwards, knocking over a tray of champagne flutes that was being prepared for the toast. The sound of the crystal shattering against the marble floor echoed through the church like a prelude to the unfolding disaster. Charles remained motionless for a few seconds, his face a mask of confusion that slowly transformed into horrified comprehension. His eyes moved between Abigail, Harriet, and Emma, as if trying to put together a puzzle, whose pieces suddenly revealed a completely different image than the one he expected. What are you saying?" he finally managed to articulate, his voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and fear of the answer. Abigail's expression quickly changed from initial shock to a desperate attempt to control the situation. "Charles, my love," she began, her now silky voice laden with barely disguised desperation. "Don't listen to that girl. She's clearly disturbed, making up absurd stories." But her words were interrupted by the sound of Harriet collapsing to the floor, the dull thud of her body against the marble, sealing the truth of the accusation more effectively than any confession. Emma, still holding the microphone, felt her heart beating like a drum in her chest. Outside the church, she could hear Lucky's distressed barking, as if her faithful friend could sense the tension that permeated the sacred environment. "Uncle," she continued, her voice now softer but still amplified by the speakers, "they planned it all. Harriet didn't introduce you to a friend from church. She introduced you to her own daughter. I heard them talking about how they were going to get your money after the wedding." The murmur among the guests increased with each passing second, transforming the solemn atmosphere of the ceremony into something closer to a scandalous fair. The priest, utterly stunned by the unfolding events, clutched his Bible against his chest as if it could protect him from the chaos descending upon his temple. "My brothers," he tried, his voice getting lost in the growing tumult, "let us remain calm and—" But his words were cut off by the sound of Charles dropping to his knees at the altar, his legs giving way under the weight of the revelation. Tears flowed freely down his face as years of trust and love shattered before his eyes. The man who moments ago was about to seal his happiness now seemed to have aged a decade in a matter of minutes. How could I have been so blind?" he muttered, more to himself than to those present. Abigail, seeing her plans crumble before her eyes, made one last, desperate attempt. She approached Charles, still kneeling at the altar, her hands outstretched in supplication. "Love, let me explain," she implored, her voice trembling with what could be mistaken for genuine emotion. "It's not quite like that. You don't understand." But something in her tone, that falsity that once went unnoticed, now sounded like a shrill alarm to the businessman's ears. Harriet was starting to regain her senses, helped by some guests who rushed to assist her after her faint. Her eyes met her daughter's, and in that glance passed a clear message of defeat. All her meticulous planning, years pretending to be a humble governess, cultivating Charles's trust, had been destroyed by the courage of a little beggar girl. The sound of Lucky's barks from outside the church seemed to mock her ruin, as if even the stray dog was celebrating the failure of her evil schemes. Charles rose slowly, his entire body trembling with a mixture of pain and fury. His eyes, once overflowing with love, now burned with a rage that made Abigail take an involuntary step back. "How did I not see it?" His voice began low, but gradually grew louder. "How did I not see that it was all just a sham? The church friend, the coincidence of our meetings, all planned by you two." The last fragment was practically shouted, making the church's stained glass windows tremble with its intensity. The guests watched the scene in deathly silence, like spectators of a Greek tragedy unfolding before their eyes. The priest had retreated discreetly to a corner of the altar, his silent prayers asking for divine guidance in this unprecedented situation during his years of ministry. Emma remained close to the microphone, her small figure now emanating a strength that seemed greater than her age, as if the act of exposing the truth had somehow transformed her. "You planned this from the start," Charles continued, now addressing Harriet directly, who had managed to stand but still leaned against a column to remain upright. You entered my home, gained my trust, all to pave the way for your daughter. How many other families have you deceived like this?" His voice trembled with a mixture of disgust and disbelief. The governess merely lowered her head, her silence more revealing than any confession. With firm steps, Charles walked to the microphone beside Emma. His face had assumed an expression of steely determination, the one his business partners knew well, the expression that preceded irrevocable decisions. Placing a protective hand on the little beggar girl's shoulder, he addressed those present. "I apologize to you all for this lamentable spectacle, but I thank you for being witnesses to the true character of these two women." Turning to Abigail and Harriet, his voice took on a tone that left no room for discussion. "You have exactly 10 minutes to disappear from my sight and my life." His eyes, usually gentle, now gleamed with a controlled fury that made both women shudder. "If you do not vanish within that time frame, or if you ever dare to show up again, I swear I will use every penny of my fortune, every connection I have, to ensure that the worst prison in the United States becomes your new home." Abigail, still in her now wine-stained wedding dress, grabbed her mother's arm. Tears of anger and frustration streamed down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "Let's go, Mom," she whispered urgently. "It's over." The two women began to move toward the side exit of the church, followed by the accusing glances of the guests. The sound of Abigail's heels against the marble floor echoed like a requiem for her shattered dreams of wealth. Emma watched the scene with a mixture of relief and sadness. Despite everything, it pained her to see the suffering etched on Charles's face. But when he turned to her, there was a gentle smile on his lips. No longer the innocent, trusting smile of before, but a new one, marked by experience and gratitude. "Emma," he said, his voice choked with emotion, "you and Lucky saved much more than my fortune today. You saved my dignity, my life." Outside, Lucky's barks had turned into joyous howls, as if he could sense that his mission had been accomplished. The morning sun now gloriously entered the church's stained glass windows, creating a kaleidoscope of colors dancing across the empty altar. The guests began to slowly disperse, whispering among themselves about the extraordinary event they had witnessed. Charles untied his bow tie with a weary motion, letting it drop onto the altar as a final symbol of the marriage that never happened. His gaze met Emma's, and in that moment a silent understanding passed between them. The streets had taught the little beggar girl that the truth, no matter how painful, was always the right path. And now, ironically, this same girl he had tried to save had ended up becoming his savior. 6 months had passed since that fateful morning in the church. The Dawson mansion, once a place of secrets and lies, now overflowed with the sound of children's laughter and joyful barks. Charles's office, which used to be his solitary refuge, now had a new decoration. Colorful drawings made by Emma decorated one of the walls, while a padded bed for Lucky occupied a strategic corner near his desk. "It's amazing," he often thought, "how life can change so much in such a short time." Emma's transformation was remarkable. The scrawny, distrustful girl from the streets had given way to a healthy and lively child, with rosy cheeks and eyes sparkling with happiness. Her clothes were now elegant but comfortable, chosen with the care of someone who can finally afford the luxury of having preferences. Every morning she ran down the mansion stairs, her school backpack on, eager for another day at the private school where Charles had enrolled her. "Uncle," she would shout from the door, "today I'll present my science project." "You'll see it will be the best in class." Lucky had also undergone an impressive transformation. His once matted and dirty fur now shone like golden silk after regular sessions at the city's most exclusive pet shop. The veterinarian marveled at his intelligence during routine checkups, always commenting on how rare it was to see a stray dog adapt so well to domestic life. The obedience training classes had only refined his naturally protective behavior, and he now executed commands with a precision that impressed everyone. "That dog," the trainer once commented, "didn't need to learn loyalty. He was born with it." Mornings at the mansion followed a new routine, established with the affection of those building a family. Charles, who used to have breakfast alone while reading financial reports, now delighted in the lively stories Emma told about her classes and friends. Lucky, ever watchful, rested at the foot of the table, occasionally receiving affectionate treats from both of them. "Tell me more about this science project," Charles would encourage, his newspaper forgotten beside the cooling coffee. The guest room had been completely renovated for Emma. The walls, now painted in soft shades of blue and green, displayed shelves filled with books, a passion the girl discovered she had as soon as she learned to read fluently. A modern desk occupied a corner of the room, where she spent hours studying and drawing, always with Lucky faithfully lying at her feet. "You know, Uncle," she commented one night, "sometimes I'm afraid of waking up and finding out that all of this was just a dream." The mansion's library, once an underutilized space, had become Emma's favorite study spot. Charles had hired the best private tutors to help her catch up on the lost years of education, and the girl proved to be an extraordinarily dedicated student. Her grades at school kept rising, to the pride of her adoptive father. "I want to be a doctor when I grow up," she announced one afternoon, surrounded by science books. "I want to help other children who weren't as lucky as me." The mansion's staff, initially hesitant about the change, soon surrendered to Emma's natural charm and Lucky's loyalty. The new governess, a kind lady named Carmen, loved preparing the girl's favorite dishes and always kept a stock of special treats for Lucky. "This house needed a soul," she confided to Charles one morning, and these two brought it back. The mansion's garden, once a purely decorative space, transformed into a natural playground for Emma and Lucky. Charles had installed swings and a treehouse, and it wasn't uncommon to find him joining in the fun on weekends, his impeccable suit forgotten in favor of more casual attire. "Life is too short to waste moments like these," he reflected, watching Emma teach Lucky new tricks. The mansion's security had also been reinforced, not out of fear, but out of loving precaution. Modern cameras and motion sensors ensured the home's tranquility, while Lucky maintained his own natural vigilance, always alert to any suspicious movement. His characteristic bark had become a comforting sound for all residents, a constant reminder of his protective dedication. "He's still the same brave dog I met on the streets," Emma would say with pride, "only now he's cleaner and stronger." Nights at the Dawson mansion now ended with a special ritual. Charles always made sure to read a story to Emma before bed, while Lucky settled at the foot of the bed, attentive to every word. "Tomorrow you'll tell me another story from your adventures on the streets," she would ask sleepily. "But only the happy stories," she would quickly add, "because now our life is like this. Only joy." The weekends at the Dawson mansion had become magical moments of family unity. On that particular Saturday morning, Charles proudly watched as Emma presented her latest talent show in the garden. The girl had organized a small performance where she and Lucky demonstrated all the tricks they had learned together. The dog executed each command with impressive precision, from sitting and lying down to more complex tricks, like playing dead and dancing in circles. "Did you see that, Uncle?" she exclaimed radiantly. "The teacher said he's never seen a dog learn so fast." Emma's academic development surprised all her teachers. In just 6 months, she had not only reached her class's level, but was beginning to excel in several subjects. Her thirst for knowledge seemed insatiable, and Charles would often find her awake late at night, reading by the lamplight, with Lucky faithfully standing guard beside her bed. "Just one more chapter," she would always ask when he came to remind her of the schedule. "This story is as interesting as the ones you tell me." The relationship between Emma and Lucky remained as strong as in their days on the streets, but had evolved into something even more special. The dog, now well cared for and healthy, maintained his protective nature, but had developed a surprising gentleness with the other children who visited the mansion, Emma's schoolmates whom she could finally invite over to play. "He knows we're safe here," she explained to her friends as Lucky received affection from everyone. "But he's still the best bodyguard in the world." Charles had transformed one of the mansion's empty rooms into a special study room for Emma. The walls were covered with world maps and educational charts. A modern internet-connected TV was installed for online classes, and a lab table was set up for her science experiments. It was there that she spent most of her free time, developing school projects that often gained prominence at science fairs. "When you graduate in medicine," Charles joked, "you'll have to build an entire hospital just for your experiments." Family meals had become sacred moments of sharing and joy. Carmen, the housekeeper, outdid herself preparing nutritious and delicious dishes, always considering the new tastes Emma discovered every day. Even Lucky had his special place in the dining room, with a bowl of fresh water and premium food always available. "I never thought I'd have a real family one day," Emma confided one night during dinner, making Charles's eyes fill with tears. The nightmares about life on the streets, which initially disturbed Emma's sleep, gradually diminished, replaced by colorful dreams about her bright future. On the rare nights when she still woke up frightened, she found immediate comfort in Lucky's soft fur and Charles's constant presence, who always appeared in her room seconds later, as if he had a sixth sense for her needs. "We're here with you," he whispered, hugging her. "We'll always be." Emma's birthday was approaching and Charles was planning a special surprise. Secretly, he had initiated the official adoption process, preparing all the necessary documents for her to legally become his daughter. The small box with the papers was stored in his desk, awaiting the perfect moment to be revealed. "Soon we'll be a family, not only in our hearts, but also on paper," he thought, imagining the joy on his future daughter's face. Lucky also had his own achievements to celebrate. The veterinarian had commented that he was one of the healthiest dogs he had ever treated, and his transformation from a stray to an exemplary companion animal was used as a success story at the clinic. His obedience classes had evolved into advanced training, and he now participated in special demonstrations for other trainers, showing how rescued dogs could become true companions. "He was born to be special," said the trainer. "He just needed a chance to shine." Sunday afternoons became special moments for walks in the park, where Emma and Lucky could run freely on the grass while Charles watched them with a smile on his face. The businessman had learned to relax more, to enjoy the small moments of happiness that previously went unnoticed in his life, focused solely on work. "Sometimes the best investments we make," he reflected, "are those that cannot be measured in money." The mansion's library remained Emma's favorite refuge for studying, but now the ancient bookshelves held a growing collection of children's and young adult books, carefully selected to fuel her imagination. Charles had hired a private librarian to organize the collection and assist her with her school research. "One day," she declared with conviction as she organized her favorite books, "I'll write my own story, and it will have a happy ending just like ours." The big day finally arrived. The mansion was decorated with colorful balloons and ribbons, and a majestic cake occupied the center of the main table. It was Emma's first birthday since she had arrived at the house, and Charles had prepared a special celebration. The garden was filled with children, schoolmates who were now true friends, and Lucky circulated among them like an attentive host, receiving affection and distributing affectionate licks. "I never imagined I'd have a party like this," Emma whispered to her faithful friend, adjusting the blue bow he wore especially for the occasion. Before cutting the cake, Charles asked for everyone's attention. His heart was beating fast as he held the small box he had kept in his desk for weeks. Emma watched him curiously, her eyes shining with expectation. With an emotional smile, he knelt before her, opening the box to reveal the finalized adoption papers. "Emma," his voice trembled slightly, "would you give me the honor of officially becoming my daughter?" The outburst of joy that followed was indescribable. The girl threw herself into his arms, tears of happiness streaming down her face, while Lucky jumped around them, barking happily as if perfectly understanding the importance of that moment. The following months brought even more positive changes. Emma, now officially Emma Dawson, continued to excel in her studies. Her latest report card had been a source of special pride, top grades in all subjects, and a special comment from her teacher about her science project exploring ways to help stray animals. "Do you think when I become a doctor," she asked her father during dinner, "I can have a clinic that treats people and animals at the same time?" Charles smiled, recognizing in her the same determination that had led him to success. Lucky also had his moments of glory. The dog who once lived on the streets was now a constant presence at charity events, where his story inspired others to adopt abandoned animals. His exemplary behavior and special connection with Emma were living proof that love and trust could transform lives. During one of those occasions, an elderly lady approached Charles with tears in her eyes. "Your family is proof that life's greatest treasures are sometimes found in the most unexpected places." Nights at the mansion now had a new tradition. After dinner, Emma, Charles, and Lucky would gather in the library, where they shared stories and dreams. The girl had begun writing her own book, narrating her adventures from her street days to her new life. "I want other children to know," she explained, as she showed her father the first chapters, "that there is always hope, no matter how difficult life seems. Charles's business success continued, but now it had a greater purpose. He had created a foundation in Emma's name, dedicated to helping street children and abandoned animals. The pilot project was already up and running, offering shelter, education, and free veterinary care. "You didn't just save my life," he told his daughter at the inauguration of the first shelter. "You taught me the true meaning of family." The weekends at the mansion had turned into moments of pure joy. The garden, always impeccably maintained, now had a special area where Lucky trained with other rescued dogs, helping them adapt to their new life. Emma proudly watched the training sessions, taking notes in her notebook about each animal's behavior. "Every dog has its own story," she would explain to visitors, "just like every person has their own." Emma's room continued to evolve with her. The walls now displayed not only her drawings, but also medals and certificates earned at school. A small bookshelf held her trophies from science competitions, and next to her bed, a framed photo showed the exact moment when Charles had hugged her after signing the adoption papers. Lucky appeared in the photo too, his snout resting affectionately on Emma's shoulder. "We're a real family," she would always say whenever she looked at the photograph. Time passed, but some things remained constant. The unconditional love between father and daughter, Lucky's unwavering loyalty, and the certainty that life's greatest miracles happen when we open our hearts to the unexpected. The Dawson mansion, once a place of loneliness and secrets, had transformed into a true home, filled with laughter, joyful barks, and genuine love. "You know, Dad," Emma said one night as the three of them gazed at the stars in the garden, "sometimes happy endings are just the beginning of an even more beautiful story." On a particularly special morning, Charles observed from the veranda as Emma played with Lucky in the garden. The sun shone softly upon them, creating a scene that seemed straight out of a dream. His heart overflowed with gratitude as he thought about how his life had changed completely, thanks to the courage of a little beggar girl and her faithful four-legged friend. "Life," he thought with a smile, "has mysterious ways of showing us the path to true happiness." The relentless sun of the United States punished the small kennel on the outskirts of the city, where Abigail and Harriet now spent their days. The contrast could not be greater, from the fine porcelain and Persian rugs of the Dawson mansion to the harsh concrete floor and rusty bars. The scandal of the failed wedding had spread like wildfire throughout the city, their photos plastered across newspapers and magazines, instantly transforming them into social pariahs. "Another rejected resume," Abigail muttered, crumpling the rejection letter in her now calloused hands. "That's the 12th one this month." The kennel was a simple and poorly maintained complex, with long rows of individual kennels housing dozens of dogs. The strong odor of cheap disinfectant mixed with other less pleasant smells permeated the air, causing Harriet to constantly wrinkle her nose, a gesture she still maintained from her days as a refined governess. Their clothes, once impeccably pressed and made of fine fabrics, had been reduced to faded and stained uniforms. "I never thought we'd end up like this," she sighed, observing her broken nails as she pushed a dirty shovel. From governess of the city's most luxurious mansion to this. The kennel's owner, Don Manuel, was a burly, ill-tempered man who seemed to take special pleasure in humiliating his new employees. He knew their stories, as did the entire city, but pretended to believe the lie they had told about being just two women seeking honest work. His gruff voice echoed around the premises several times a day, always laden with sharp orders and impatient criticism. "You two," he shouted that morning. "Kennel number 5 is filthy. Go back there and clean it properly, or it's a pay cut." The dogs seemed to have a sixth sense for identifying the two women's falsity. Whenever Abigail or Harriet approached the bars, they were met with hostile growls and barks. One particularly large German shepherd had the habit of spitting water and food every time Abigail tried to clean its space, as if it knew exactly how to provoke the woman who had once dreamed of being a society lady. "These filthy animals," she snarled through gritted teeth, "seemed to do it on purpose." The nights brought no rest for the duo. They now lived in a small room at the back of the kennel, a cramped space with 2 narrow beds and a tiny, barely functioning bathroom. The dog's barking was constant, a torturous symphony that prevented them from sleeping properly. Harriet would often wake up startled, dreaming of the glory days at the Dawson mansion. "Daughter," she would whisper into the darkness, "where did we go wrong?" The news of the failed scam had spread far beyond the city, reaching every corner of the United States. Investigative journalists had uncovered other similar cases in their past, though never as ambitious as the attempt with Charles. Their wedding day photographs, Abigail in her bridal gown and Harriet in her governess uniform, had become cautionary symbols in society columns. "Look at this," said Abigail, flipping through an old newspaper during her lunch break. "They're still talking about us. The wedding scammers, a warning to Mexican society." The work at the kennel was grueling and seemingly endless. They had barely finished cleaning one row of kennels when the dogs had already soiled the first ones again. The relentless sun turned the place into an oven during the day, and the precarious structure barely protected them from the rain during storms. Don Manuel made sure to constantly remind them that they were lucky to have even landed that job. "No one else would hire two known scammers," he would repeat with a wicked smile. Attempts to find work elsewhere always ended in failure. Their names had become so tarnished that even in neighboring cities they were recognized. Once Abigail had secured an interview at a department store, but a quick internet search was enough for the manager to dismiss her with contemptuous looks. "It's as if we're branded," she lamented, scrubbing a particularly stubborn stain on the kennel floor. "Condemned to this hell forever." Weekends, once devoted to social events and shopping at exclusive boutiques, were now filled with even more degrading tasks at the kennel. Don Manuel always saved the most unpleasant jobs for Saturdays and Sundays, like cleaning the kennels of the most aggressive dogs or unclogging the drains clogged with hair. "It's so you don't forget your place," he would say with evident satisfaction. "No mansion pampering here." The money they earned barely covered basic necessities. The minimum wage they received was further reduced by the rent for the room at the back of the kennel, which Don Manuel made sure to charge above market value. On the quietest nights, when the dogs finally calmed down, it was possible to hear Harriet softly crying in her bed, while Abigail stared at the peeling ceiling, both lost in thoughts about how their dreams of wealth had turned into this endless nightmare. "Mummy," Abigail murmured one of those nights, "is there a way back after falling so deep?" The routine at the kennel was an endless succession of humiliations. On that particularly hot morning, Abigail was on her knees scrubbing the floor of one of the kennels when an especially malicious Rottweiler shook itself after drinking water, soaking her completely. Her already worn and stained clothes now smelled of wet dog. From the other side of the hallway, Don Manuel let out a harsh laugh that echoed throughout the room. "What luxury, huh, miss? Taking a bath with imported water?" He mocked, making sure to emphasize the miss with a tone of scorn. Harriet was in no better situation. Her hands, once protected by silk gloves when she tended to the Dawson mansion, were now rough and marked by small cuts from the rusted cage wires. The hard labor had hunched her back, and her face, once only marked by delicate wrinkles, now showed deep furrows of worry and bitterness. "Abigail," she called in a low voice as she tried to contain an unusually agitated German shepherd. "Sometimes I think we were cursed by that little beggar girl." The other kennel workers, all aware of the two women's story, kept their distance and made sure to show their contempt. During meals, no one sat near them in the small staff room. Conversations were interrupted when they approached, and barely concealed laughter followed them down the hallways. "Look at the kennel, madames," they whispered to each other, loud enough to be heard. From wedding dresses to uniforms, soiled with dog poop. Don Manuel seemed to take a special pleasure in assigning the most degrading tasks to the duo. That day, after the incident with another large dog, he appeared with a malicious smile on his face. "We have a special case today," he announced, pointing to an isolated kennel at the back of the property. "A more aggressive breed of dog with mange. It needs a medicated bath and someone to clean its wounds. I think our former madames here are perfect for the job." The look of horror exchanged between mother and daughter only increased his satisfaction. The nights in the small back room were filled with mutual recriminations and bitter regrets. "If you hadn't insisted on that absurd plan," Harriet accused on one of those nights, her voice trembling with contained rage. "If we had been more patient, chosen another target." Abigail would cut off these discussions with an icy stare, though her own silent tears in the early morning hours betrayed her despair. The notoriety of the scandal followed them even in the most banal moments. One day, during a rare day off, they tried to shop at the small local market. The owner, recognizing them immediately, made sure to follow them down every aisle, as if they were common thieves. "We only sell for cash to a certain type of customer," he said when they reached the register, making a point to carefully inspect each note he received. Abigail's attempts to maintain some dignity were constantly frustrated by the cruel reality of her new life. Her hair, once perfectly dyed and styled, now displayed grey roots and dried-out ends. The nail polish had long chipped away, revealing stained and calloused fingers from the hard labor. "I look like an old woman," she murmured one night, observing her reflection in the small, cracked bathroom mirror. An old, washed-up woman before her time. The dog's behavior towards them worsened with each passing day, as if the animals could sense the falsity and bitterness emanating from their forced caretakers. One day, as Harriet tried to feed a litter of puppies they all refused to eat, preferring to growl and move away from her, Don Manuel, watching the scene, did not miss the opportunity. "Even the mutts have more class than you two put together," he taunted, laughing at his own joke. The irony of their situation did not go unnoticed. They, who had planned to live a life of luxury at Charles' expense, now depended on Don Manuel's generosity to have a roof over their heads, even if that roof was just a tiny room in the back of a kennel. "You know what's worse, Mom?" Abigail said one night, her voice choked. "It's knowing we deserve every second of this." Fate seemed to have a particularly cruel sense of humor. The small radio in the staff lounge would occasionally broadcast news about Charles Dawson and his new happy family, his adopted daughter Emma and the loyal dog Lucky. Each mention was like a stab in the hearts of the two women, a constant reminder of what they had lost because of their own greed. "Turn that off!" Harriet shouted once, unable to bear hearing about yet another charitable endeavor of the Dawson Foundation. "Aren't the dogs tormenting us enough? Do we have to listen about that damned girl too?" The months dragged on at the kennel like a perpetual sentence. On a particularly difficult afternoon, Abigail found herself cleaning an especially dirty area when she heard the familiar sound of a luxury car pulling up outside. Her heart stopped for a moment when she recognized the model. It was identical to the one Charles used to drive. For a moment of delirium, she imagined he had come to fetch her, that it had all been a nightmare. But it was just a wealthy client looking to purchase a purebred dog. The man walked right past her, without even noticing her, as if she were just another object in the desolate kennel scenery. Harriet's physical decline accelerated visibly. The hard labor and sleepless nights had taken their toll. Her once delicate, well-manicured hands now trembled constantly, covered in calluses and small cuts that never fully healed. During a particularly exhausting afternoon, she fainted while carrying a bag of dog food. Instead of showing concern, Don Manuel merely shouted from his office, "If you can't handle the work, there's a line of people wanting your job. Even the dogs work harder than you two." The few possessions they had managed to bring from the mansion, some jewelry and fine clothes, were sold off one by one to cover basic expenses. Each piece represented a memory of their former life, and each sale was like ripping out a piece of their dreams. One day, Abigail found her mother crying silently over the last pair of gold earrings they had left. "Remember when you got these for your 15th birthday?" Harriet sobbed. "Now we can't even keep those." The next day, the earrings were sold to pay an overdue pharmacy bill. The kennel dog seemed to have developed a special delight in tormenting the two women. It was as if each animal had inherited a bit of Lucky's spirit, the one who had helped destroy their grandiose plans. One day during the kennel cleaning, an entire pack of dogs started barking in unison as soon as Abigail approached, creating a deafening cacophony that only stopped when she moved away. "Even they know who you are," Don Manuel taunted, watching the scene with evident satisfaction. Abigail's transformation was the most dramatic. The young woman who had once dreamed of being the lady of the Dawson mansion now barely recognized herself in the mirror. Her once silky, well-tended hair had lost all its luster, tied in a messy bun to keep it from getting even dirtier during work. Her clothes, even the simplest ones, were always stained and smelled of kennel, no matter how many times they were washed. "It's as if the stench of our misery has seeped into our very skin," she bitterly commented one night. The tiny room at the back of the kennel was their only refuge, although they found no true peace even there. The thin walls did not block out the constant barking, and the smell of the animals seeped in through every crack. One night, during a heavy storm, the roof began to leak, forcing them to stay awake for hours, moving buckets to catch the dripping water. "Do you remember when we complained about the noise from the fountain in the mansion's garden?" Harriet asked, her voice heavy with regret. How foolish we were. Loneliness was perhaps the cruelest aspect of their new life. No one visited them. No one sought them out. The few friends from their luxurious days had vanished completely, and the other kennel workers treated them like pariahs. On the rare occasions they needed to go to town, they were received with looks of contempt and barely disguised whispers. "Look," people would murmur, "those are the ones from the marriage scam. How they have fallen." The future, which had once seemed so bright and promising, now stretched before them like an endless road of misery and regret. There was no prospect of change, no hope of redemption. Each day was simply a repetition of the one before. Waking before sunrise, cleaning kennels, feeding dogs, enduring humiliations, sleeping exhausted only to start it all over again the next day. "It's our perpetual prison," Abigail reflected one night, watching the moon through the small window of the room. "And we built the bars ourselves." Life had become a bitter lesson on the consequences of greed and lies. The two women who had once dreamed of conquering Mexican high society now found themselves at the lowest rung of the social ladder, caring for the very animals they had once despised. The sound of barking, the persistent smell, the hard labor, and the daily humiliations were their constant punishment, a perpetual reminder of how their grand plans had turned into their own downfall. Don Manuel made sure to remind them of their situation daily. "Do you know why I keep you two here?" he asked one day, his malicious smile revealing the pleasure he took in his cruelty. "Because seeing you clean up after my dogs is the best proof that divine justice exists. Every day you spend here is another day of vengeance for all the people you deceived." Harriet and Abigail could only lower their heads, knowing he was right. This was their fate now, their punishment for all the wickedness they had planned and executed over the years. The final irony of their destiny was that even if they wanted to leave the kennel, they had nowhere to go. The outside world had completely rejected them, and even this humiliating work was better than utter destitution on the streets. On her sleepless nights, Abigail sometimes found herself thinking of little Emma and how she had mocked her for her life on the streets. Now she herself was only a few steps away from that reality, protected solely by the degrading work she so despised. The routine at the kennel had become their prison, but also their only refuge. The days blurred into one another in an endless cycle of demeaning tasks and humiliations. The mornings began with the barking of the dogs, their involuntary alarm clock, and ended with the same canine chorus, as if the animals were celebrating another day of their punishment. The smell of the kennels had become so deeply ingrained in their clothes and skin that they could no longer detect any other scent. Don Manuel made sure to constantly remind them of their paradoxical fate. "You should thank me on your knees," he would often say, his smile revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Who else would give jobs to two famous con artists? Here at least you have a roof and food, even if it's in the company of the dogs you once despised." Each word was like a knife twisting in a wound that never healed. Attempts to find other work had become increasingly humiliating and fruitless. Once, Abigail had secured an interview at a small clothing store in a neighboring town. For a moment, she believed she could start over until the shop owner recognized her face from an old news report. "We don't hire your kind," the woman said, her tone making it clear that your kind meant something far worse than just con artist. In her darkest moments of despair, Harriet tried to find solace in religion. She had started attending the small chapel near the kennel, always at the emptiest time to avoid accusatory glances. Her prayers, however, seemed as hollow as her old promises of loyalty to Charles. "God has abandoned us," she would say bitterly. Or perhaps he was never truly with us, since our hearts were so black. The worst was observing how the years of hard work had affected their bodies. Abigail's hands, once a symbol of elegance with her nails always perfectly manicured, were now calloused and rough, with broken nails and inflamed cuticles. Harriet's face had aged decades in just a few years, marked by deep wrinkles of worry and regret. Her back, bent from the constant cleaning work, seemed to carry not only the physical weight of the tasks, but also the burden of all her wrong choices. The other kennel workers had developed a cruel game of betting how long they would last before giving up completely. Some said Harriet would be the first to break, Others bet on Abigail. The bet money circulated openly during breaks, while the two tried to ignore the glances and barely concealed laughter. "How long until the kennel princesses return to the streets?" they asked each other, loud enough to be heard. So they continued their routine day after day, cleaning, feeding, enduring, two shadows of what they once were, living a life that was the exact opposite of everything they had dreamed of. Their days were no longer marked by social events or ambitious plans, but by the barking of dogs, the smell of cheap disinfectant, and the constant awareness of their failure. Each morning brought with it the weight of another day of atonement, each night the certainty that they would wake up to repeat the same cycle of humiliation. "I think in the end," Harriet whispered one night as the sound of dogs echoed through the dark room, "we got exactly what we deserved." Abigail did not respond, but her silent tears wet the worn pillow. Fate had taken care of their punishment with an almost poetic precision. The women who had tried to use a marriage to achieve luxury now found themselves trapped in a life that was the complete antithesis of their dreams, caring for the very animals that had helped reveal their true nature. We have reached the end of this exciting story about love, redemption, and justice. If this narrative has touched your heart, we would be very happy to receive your like and subscription to our channel. Your support is crucial for us to continue sharing stories that make us reflect on the true values of life. Soon we will bring more surprising narratives that, like this one, will stir your emotions and make you think about the power of kindness and truth. Don't miss the other special videos we have selected especially for you. They are appearing on your screen right now. Your presence here means a lot to us. Every view, every comment, every shared moment motivates us to seek out increasingly special stories. So how about exploring more incredible content? The links are available on the screen, ready to take you on new, exciting adventures. Thank you so much for being with us on this journey. See you in the next story.